They didn't cut me out all at once. It happened slowly. One skipped call, one empty chair, one joke that wasn't a joke. By the time I realized it, I'd become the kind of family member you talk about only in past tense. Someone who used to help, used to show up, used to matter. I kept giving anyway. I showed up anyway. I kept hoping love would sound different if I just stayed quiet long enough. But that night, sitting at a table full of people who shared my last name and nothing else, I understood something I should have learned years ago. Silence doesn't earn respect. It just teaches them you'll take the hit and smile through it. So I smiled one last time, and in that moment, I stopped being the one they could rewrite. They had no idea the next chapter wasn't theirs to tell. Charleston hadn't changed. The harbor still smelled of salt and steel. The ships still lined the water like monuments to a glory I no longer believed in. I hadn't been home in 3 years, yet walking into that hall felt like stepping into a frame that had kept moving without me. The Navy Club shimmered in gold light, the air thick with pride and stories polished too often. My father stood at the center of it all, his back straight, his voice commanding as ever. 65 and still the colonel in every room. My mother hovered nearby, orchestrating smiles with surgical precision. My siblings glowed in their uniforms of belonging. Marissa passed around photos of her husband's new promotion. Zach flashed his Coast Guard badge like it was proof of something divine. I sat at the far end, hands folded around a small envelope, the only thing I'd brought. Inside was an old photo of my father and me, back when his medals hadn't yet outnumbered his words. My mother's glance found me, that thin, polite smile. "At least you showed up this time," she said, tone sweet as vinegar. I matched it with a calm that cost me years to master. "At least you noticed." I answered, and the table burst into the kind of laughter that hides discomfort behind polished teeth. The stories circled around battles I'd never fought, victories I'd never been allowed to claim. When my father praised Ryan Alden, Marissa's husband, as the kind of man this family's built on, I looked at the empty chair beside me and wondered when I'd stopped being part of the foundation. When it was over, Zach called after me with a grin sharp enough to cut. "Still working from home? Must be nice not having a boss." I didn't turn. "Someone's got to protect your radar," I said, and walked out before the joke reached him. Outside, the night air carried the hum of ships asleep in the harbor. Their hulls caught the last of the light, silent, immense, unmoving. I stood there a long time, realizing how easy it was to mistake stillness for insignificance, and how often I'd let them do exactly that. I used to believe love meant helping without being mentioned. I know better now. When you let people forget what you do for them, forgetting becomes a habit they never intend to break. When my mother had her stroke, I paid every cent of the hospital bill, over $9,000, using a classified bonus from a defense contract. When she recovered, my father told the relatives he'd handled it all himself, thanks to his veterans insurance. I stayed quiet. When Zach was nearly suspended for misusing Coast Guard surveillance equipment, I rewrote the system logs to clear his record. 2 months later, they gave him a medal for exceptional integrity. Stayed. And Marissa, my graceful, untouchable sister, called me at midnight during her final semester, crying because her thesis had crashed and all her data was gone. I stayed up 3 nights straight, rebuilding it from fragments. She graduated with honors, thanking the family that's always stood by me. I sat in the back row, watching the flag whip against the wind, realizing I was part of that sentence only in theory. Early that summer, my inbox chimed with a single line from the Department of Defense. Deployment notice, integration of B7net encryption to SE radar fleet. B7net, my own internal code. The encryption system I built from scratch. They were deploying it across the Southeastern Radar Network, the one under Captain Ryan Alden's command. I didn't feel proud. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I opened the technical addendum. My name wasn't there. The credits listed Thurman Defense Technologies, a civilian company my father used to contract with when he was still in uniform. For a long time, I just stared at the screen, the reflection of its blue light twisting my face in the glass. In the government database, I'd been erased, just like I'd been erased from the family stories told over dinner tables and holiday calls. Maybe working in the dark means accepting that the dark eventually swallows you whole. 3 weeks later, I went to my parents' house for dinner. My mother had called it a small family night. The place looked like a private museum. Medals lined the walls, portraits of Ryan in his dress whites, and a carved oak plaque above the mantel that read honor, courage, commitment. The meal began and, as always, turned into a celebration of someone else's achievements. My father told a story, his voice full of pride. When Alden got promoted, even the admiral shook his hand twice. My mother nodded, adding softly, Marissa knew how to pick the right man. Zach leaned back, smirking. Maybe Saskia's still waiting for someone with Wi-Fi clearance. I smiled, not warmly. Maybe I'm just waiting for someone who doesn't need me to explain what I do. No one laughed, no one even looked up. After dinner, I washed the dishes alone. From the living room came my mother's voice, calm and tired. I just wished she'd find something real. Not this online consulting thing. Something real. I had signed off a secure document that very morning. Authorization to deploy a network that would keep 47 naval vessels safe in hostile waters. Yet somehow, I was still the one living in make-believe. I stepped out to the porch. Streetlights shimmered across the water like thin silver scars. In the distance, the tide murmured against the docks. Maybe the truest thing about me, I thought, is how invisible I've become. They were planning a celebration for Captain Ryan Alden's promotion, and everyone in my family acted as if a royal coronation were taking place. My sister's husband was the pride of their existence, the proof that the Bennetts still belonged to the world of honor and ceremony. I wasn't invited. I found out through Eleanor, an old colleague from my Navy Tech days. She sent me a photo from the event, a crowded hall, white uniforms gleaming under gold light, and a single line. Funny thing, they're using your encryption suite in Alden's fleet. You know about that? The words drained the air out of the room. I opened the military system archives, scrolling through line after line until the name appeared again and again. B7 Net Encryption, Southeast Fleet Integration. That was mine. I had built that system 3 years ago, a complex web of security that shielded radar data from external interference. Yet as I traced the new version, something caught my eye. The root code had been altered, not broken, not corrupted, edited, a deliberate bypass, allowing someone to access radar feeds without authorization. Someone had turned my work into a weapon for fraud. If the breach became public, the Navy would explode in scandal, and the first name on the investigation list would be Ryan Alden, the fleet's commanding officer, the man my family now worshipped like a symbol of purity. I stared at the photo Eleanor had sent, Ryan in his uniform, raising a glass beside my father, both smiling like they'd built the world together. Beneath it, Marissa's caption glowed from my phone screen. So proud to be part of this legacy. Legacy, a word no one had ever used for me. I drafted a report to the Department of Defense, an anonymous alert that could expose the manipulation. But my finger froze above the send button. If I submitted it, the investigation would drag my father's name through federal records, and Ryan's through military court. If I stayed silent, a national defense network would remain compromised. I sat there for hours, surrounded by the hum of the sea through my window, typing and erasing lines of code. Each keystroke sounded like a heartbeat. Justice, I realized, might cost me the only thing I'd tried to protect all these years, my family's illusion of honor. When I ran a deeper trace, a hidden document surfaced in the military storage system. The approval signature belonged to Thurman Defense Technologies, the same private contractor my father once partnered with during his service. It wasn't just a glitch in my code. It was a pipeline of money and deceit. And the name on that pipeline was one my family had toasted for decades. 2 weeks later, Marissa sent a text. Family dinner at the base club. If you come, please keep it low profile. Low profile. That's what they always wanted from me. visible enough to prove I hadn't disappeared, quiet enough not to take up space. I went anyway, not to belong, but to look someone in the eye. The club shimmered with brass fixtures and soft jazz, white tablecloths, champagne flutes, metals catching the amber light. I wore a pale blue shirt and dark trousers, neat but simple, dressed to be overlooked. No one greeted me. My father's face barely flickered when I arrived. "Well, look who decided to be part of the family again," he said. My mother cut in with her practiced calm. "Don't start." Richard, then to me, that brittle smile. "Just be polite, sweetheart. Tonight's about Ryan." Zach leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Still doing that computer stuff? Still fixing other people's messes?" I said. He laughed too loud. No one asked what I meant. When I stepped outside to take a call, I paused near the corridor. Ryan's voice drifted through the open door, low and measured. "We found a trace in the encryption suite, something about a Bennett protocol." Another officer chuckled. "Related to Marissa's sister?" A pause. Then Ryan said quietly, "I don't think so. Different world." I froze. Different world. He wasn't wrong. His was a world of medals and applause. Mine existed in shadow, the kind of shadow that powered their lights. When I walked back in, my father was mid-story, gesturing with his glass. He was bragging about an old colleague from Thurman Defense, the smartest man I ever worked with. My eyes drifted to his hand. A silver ring gleamed under the chandelier, engraved with Thurman's logo. The air went cold in my lungs. That was the moment I understood. If I did nothing, everything I'd built, the work, the code, the years of sacrifice, would collapse under the weight of their corruption. I left before dessert, their laughter echoing behind me like a closing door. In the car, I flipped open my laptop. The dashboard glowed in the dark. I typed a single command into the secure military channel. Authorization request. Internal audit. B7net. The screen pulsed to life, a quiet confirmation blinking back at me. And just like that, I'd set a fuse that could burn straight through the Bennett name. A week after the dinner, a red flag email appeared in my classified inbox. Security breach detected in Southeast Radar Fleet. Internal audit initiated. Classified Level 4. Ryan's Fleet. My system. The Department of Defense ordered a silent investigation, and I was drafted in as a technical consultant. From that moment forward, my name ceased to exist. Every trace of Saskia Bennett was replaced by an ID. Consultant 47B7. The investigation office sat buried inside an abandoned wing of the naval base. No windows, no sound except the hum of servers. I pulled up the system logs. The unauthorized entry originated inside Ryan's division. The file tag stopped me cold. Thurman Patch V4.2. Thurman Defense Technologies, my father's old business partner. Their update wasn't a fix, it was a doorway. The deeper I dug, the worse it became. Radar data had been copied and sold. If it surfaced, Ryan's entire command would be shut down. My father's ring, engraved with Thurman's crest, flashed in memory. The connections were too precise to be coincidence. Then the source address appeared. A civilian IP from my parents' street. The device tag matched a laptop once registered under Richard Bennett. My hands shook. Report it, and my father would face federal inquiry. Stay silent, and the breach would widen. That night, the blue light from my monitor cut through the dark as I sat motionless, typing nothing. How many of us, I wondered, had lived off a version of honor that couldn't survive exposure? By morning, I'd made my choice. In the briefing room, I kept my tone flat. The breach originated from a non-military source, possibly civilian, investigation ongoing. No one realized the civilian might share my DNA. Hours later, a message slid through the encrypted network. If you're who I think you are, stop digging. Some names aren't meant to surface. I copied it to an offline drive, sealed it behind my own encryption, and looked out the window. The Charleston sky hung heavy and gray, the air tasting like rust and salt. Someone was watching, but the possibility that it was family chilled me more than any stranger ever could. 3 days later, they summoned me to the base for a closed-door session. Fluorescent light bled over the table. At the head sat Captain Ryan Alden. He looked up, recognition flickering before protocol took over. The coordinator gestured, "Captain Alden, this is Consultant 47B7. She'll handle the verification." He straightened. "Understood." No one in that room knew the analyst at the far corner was his wife's sister. For 4 hours I presented data. Each file tightened the air until it hummed. When the others left, Ryan stayed. "Bennett," he said quietly. "Captain, you wrote this code." I met his eyes. "I can't discuss that." "Then it did its job," he said, and walked out. That night, the audit system automatically logged a private call between him and Marissa. "Did you know your sister works for the Department of Defense?" "Saskia? She barely works." He paused. "Then you've been living next to a ghost with more stars than anyone in this family." The next morning, another message appeared. "We need to talk. In person." Rain swept the old southern pier as I approached him. "You knew," he said. "I knew enough to stop it." "You also knew who wrote the patch." Silence. "It's your father, isn't it?" I didn't answer. He exhaled. "I won't report it. Not yet. But they're watching both of us." We stood there, two soldiers from opposite worlds sharing the same truth. When I came home, an envelope waited on my step. Inside was a photo of my desk and a single handwritten note. "Stay quiet." Saskia, no signature, no fingerprints, only my mother's handwriting. Marissa's 35th birthday happened to fall on the night Ryan was to receive his Navy Service Medal. I hadn't planned to attend, but my mother called the night before. Her tone clipped. "You'll be there. It's family. Don't make a scene." I said quietly. "I'm done with scenes." I arrived late. The Naval Hall was blinding with gold and white. Flags, brass, champagne. My father glowed at the head table. My mother's smile thin behind her glass of red wine. Marissa looked away when our eyes met. No one told me where to sit. I chose a chair near the exit, where cold light spilled across the tiles. I planned to stay just long enough to be polite. The host began announcing the honoree when the main doors opened. Ryan entered in full dress whites, cap under his arm, medals catching the light. The laughter died as he walked through the crowd. He didn't stop for Marissa. He didn't look at my father. He came straight to me. He halted, straightened, and raised his hand in salute. "Ma'am! On behalf of the division you protected, thank you." A glass shattered. Silence expanded. I stood, voice steady. "You don't owe me anything. Captain, you just did your duty." He nodded. "So did you." The room stood still. In that quiet, the family's empire of pride finally cracked, and I walked out into the sound of the sea. 3 days later, the Department of Defense released the findings. 2 Thurman defense contractors were indicted for budget fraud and classified data leaks. The radar network was restored. The fault pinned entirely on the civilian side. No officers were disciplined, not even Ryan. No one knew I was the one who had filed the anonymous evidence report. That evening, an envelope waited on my doorstep. Inside was a handwritten note from Marissa. For believing what was easier to believe, for laughing when I should have asked, for not seeing what you carried for all of us. I folded it carefully and set it beside my laptop. The phone rang. My father's voice was quiet for once. "We didn't realize how far you went to protect this country." "You didn't have to," I said softly. "That was my job." A month later, I was invited to speak at the National Security Forum in Washington, D.C. The talk was called The Unseen Line of Defense. I spoke about the nameless, the ones with no photographs, no medals, yet whose silence kept the system alive. In the back row, I saw my parents standing. No uniforms, no ribbons, only tears and posture. For the first time, their eyes held no judgment, only respect. When I returned to my hotel, a single email waited. You changed the standard. Front A. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Silence had finally become peace. Months later, I left Washington behind and returned to the Charleston coast. I bought a small house by the harbor, where the waves met the shore with a rhythm that felt like a heart finally healed. I spent my days teaching cybersecurity to young veterans, helping them bridge the gap between the battlefield and civilian life. The work was quiet, steady, yet for the first time, I felt truly free. On my desk rested two things: Marissa's letter, edges softened with time, and a framed photo of my father in his old uniform. The wood, dark and worn. One morning, another envelope arrived. Inside was a single note in Marissa's handwriting. Dad tells everyone now that his eldest was the strongest soldier he never understood. I read it twice, then let it rest beside the others. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. Peace doesn't need witnesses. Outside, the Charleston sunrise spilled gold over the water. Seagulls crossed the horizon as I whispered, almost to myself. Justice doesn't shout, it salutes. The sea breeze brushed through my hair, carrying salt and quiet freedom. I finally understood. Life doesn't need permission, it only needs truth.